I was going to speak about a different topic, honestly, but after last night's little speech over here, several people came over, they reached out, and apparently that talk spoke to them. And apparently it was a talk which is relevant to a lot of us. Concept of what's going on in our hearts and we are really feeling. So I want to continue on that topic and mention a few chazals. This lecture will be more Torah based, and to see what the perspective of the Torah is on what this galut that we're in is all about. There's a fascinating midrash, a continuation of last night, which we spoke about the Gemara. I'm sure you heard about it throughout the day today. Destruction of the Beit HaMikdash was because of Sinat Chinam, and that's why we're still here. There's an incredible midrash in Midrash Eicha, Midrash Rabbah Eicha, which speaks about the impending destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, where the midrash gives us an inside scoop of what happened upstairs in Shemayim. The midrash writes that at the time that Hashem had decreed the destruction and ruination and death was going to come upon the Jewish people, Avram Avinu comes before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Avram says, Ribono Shel Olam, take a look at my life. Look how much I did for you. My entire life was all about Hashem. Avram Ivri, Avram on one side of the world, the rest of the world on the other side. Avram Avinu was willing to give up his life for the sake of Hashem, to be thrown into a furnace. Avram Avinu, who had tremendous faith in Hashem, Emunah, Bitachon, at the age of 100. And Avram Avinu was very, very special and holy his entire life. And he comes and he begs Hashem, please have mercy and terachem al banai, and have mercy on my children, on the descendants. What is the response? Hashem does not respond, does not answer. Says the Midrash, then Patach Yitzchak Avinu takes a shot at it. Yitzchak comes and he says, Hashem, please, the fact that I was willing to give my life over for the sake of the Jews, for the sake of the Akedat Yitzchak and the future, we still benefit from it. Have mercy, no response. Comes Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu says, Hashem, take a look at my life, how much I suffered for doing what's right, and a difficult life Yaakov Avinu lived. And the Midrash writes that Hashem did not respond. So you have the Avot, the three pillars of the world, they did not succeed in speaking to Hashem and convincing him to put an end to this blockage, to this galut. After the three Avot fail, comes along Moshe Rabbeinu, Patach Moshe. Moshe comes and he starts begging Hashem for mercy. Hashem, look what I did for your children, 40 years in the desert, and I risked my life for them, and I put so much on the line. Everything I did, please answer them, answer us, have mercy on them. Midrash writes nothing. There's no response. Even Moshe Rabbeinu got no response. Says the Midrash that the Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was not responded, the Avot came to Moshe and they told him, what are the oivim, what are the enemies doing to our children? Apparently, they wanted to ask Moshe. He had a sneak peek into what's going on down here. And Moshe responds, the enemies kaftu yedem lachreim, they have tied them, they have tortured them, they're walking around unclothed, there are people dead, people laying in the street, that the birds and animals are even eating their carcasses, their bodies. Horrific sights. And the Avot say, Vayadim talivnan, woe upon us for our descendants and our children. Rabotai, this is the part of the Midrash which is so fascinating. No response from Hashem for any of them until one person comes, and that person was by the name of Rachel Imenu. This is the famous Midrash based on the Pasuk, Rachel mevak al baneha. Comes along Rachel and he says, Rifna Kadosh Baruch Hu, Master of the universe, Galui lefanecha, that you know my life. You know what I did, that I wanted to marry Yaakov Avinu, and my entire being in essence was about building the 12 Shvatim and building the future of Klal Yisrael. And we all know the story that came time to the wedding. Before the wedding, Yaakov Avinu goes to Rachel and he says, I know my father-in-law. I know your father. I know he's going to try to pull shtick. He's going to try to maneuver out of this. And I'm going to give you signs. And this will only be between me and you. No one will be able to figure this out. And we'll be safe. So, Rachel agrees. Rachel says, yes, I agree 100%. Let's do this. Gives her the signs. Now it gets closer to the wedding. Says to Midrash, it was a few days before the wedding. And Rachel starts feeling, thoughts going through her mind. What's going to be with my sister? After all, she's going to get embarrassed. If, but she'll have the signs. And I don't want to embarrass her. The Midrash says that Rachel gave up on her entire life, on her dreams, on her hopes, on her ambitions, and everything she had in mind. Gave it all up for the sake of who? For the sake of her sister. The Midrash writes, Miyad nitgagalu rachamav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says immediately when everything else failed, Hashem's mercy was aroused. V'amar b'shvilech Rachel ani machzir et Yisrael le'makom, and because of you, I'm going to return Klal Yisrael back to their land. Rabbi, it seems that all the avot failed. The Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the three pillars, we daven in their zechut in every single Shemona Esrei. Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. And Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the cream of the crop. He was the greatest human being ever. And yet they were not able to succeed in convincing Hashem to have mercy until comes along Rachel Imenu, and Rachel is able to convince Hashem. And what I want to address today is what gives. How does it make sense that they give three avot with all their zechut did not work? Nothing worked. Hashem was not listening to anything they had to say. Moshe Rabbeinu, cream of the crop, nothing, no response. Yet this lady Rachel Imenu, she comes with a defense for Klal Yisrael. Look what I did. Have mercy on them. Hashem says, ooh, you're different. Rachel Imenu is different. And I'm going to bring them back to their land at the times they're going to be in the times of end of exile. Your zechut is what's going to bring Mashiach. Klal Yisrael is going to go back to Eretz Yisrael. So I want to try to understand what exactly is the zechut of this Rachel. What's the significance of Rachel Imenu? Now, if you want to get an understanding of this, you have to take a look back. What was the beginning of our exile? And we have to have a clear understanding of this before all the stories and inspiration and everything. You have to have understanding of the Torah. What was the beginning of how we, Jewish people, who were holding on the highest of levels, and we had prestige and honor and respected, how did we end up becoming slaves? Where did we go downhill? The first galut, we ended up in Mitzrayim. How did it all happen? Well, the Midrash and Chazal say that if you take a look at the Torah, Torah tells us that the beginning of the 12 Shvatim, it did not begin too well. There was a boy by the name of Yosef. And the Pasuk says that Yaakov Avinu loved this Yosef. This boy who was Ben Zekunim, these important words, I'm going to come back to this, so remember this. He says he was a Ben Zekunim, Hashem loved him. Va'asa lo ketonot pasim, and he made them this ketonot pasim. What's a ketonot pasim? It's a tunic. It was a certain clothing that he passed on to Yosef as a sign of endearment. Yosef was the favored child. The Gemara Shabbat writes, and this is an important point for anyone here who has kids. Gemara Shabbat says, "Le'olam al yeshane adam bein habanim." A person should not differentiate between one child to the next. Do not differentiate. Why? Because Yaakov Avinu, since he favored Yosef just a little bit more than the other brothers, Nitkanu be'achav, the brothers became jealous. V'yardu avateinu mitzrayim, and all our ancestors, forefathers ended up in Mitzrayim. The Torah seems to be saying, and the Gemara seems to be saying, that since Yaakov favored Yosef, there was jealousy amongst the brothers. This jealousy, usually when the people are jealous, a lot of times it leads into sinah, into hatred, as a pasuk clearly writes. It says, "Vayarchav ki oto av avihem." They saw that the father loved them. V'yisnu oto, and they hated him. V'lo yachlu daber l'sham, they could not speak to him peacefully. So the kina, jealousy, led to sinah, led to hatred. The hatred led to a psak din, they paskin, that he's a rodef, he's pursuing to kill them, because Yosef was going and slandering l'shem shamayim, saying negative things about his brothers to the father. And they paskin, he's a rodef, pursuing to kill them. The halacha is that if someone gets up to kill you, you're allowed to defend yourself and kill them. And therefore, they decide to kill him. Comes along, the decision changed, and they decided to sell him. They sell him to a bunch of Ishmaelim. This is the catalyst which puts into motion all this series of events. They all ended up in Mitzrayim, and all of Klal Yisrael ended up in Mitzrayim. This was the first exile. Chazal are very clear that the entire exile and why we ended up in Galut is purely why it began with sinah. It began because of hatred. Apparently, whenever there is hatred, Hashem says, there's hatred, you don't deserve to live in Eretz Yisrael. You're going to have to move to Mitzrayim. You're going to have to move to Galut. You're going to be exiled. And hence they were sent out. You fast forward in time 22 years. This is a fascinating idea. 22 years later, Yosef is sitting on his throne. He's the viceroy of Egypt. He's second in power. And eventually, a series of events we all know, he decided to reveal himself to the brothers. He says, Ani Yosef Haod Avichai. Right after he reveals himself, what happens? The Torah says an interesting thing happened. He went over to Binyamin, his brother, the only brother from the same mother. And the pasuk says, Vayipol atzavar Binyamin achiv vayevk, that he fell on Binyamin's neck and he started crying. Ubinyamin bachat tzavarav, and Binyamin was crying on his shoulder. So there they are, Yosef and Binyamin, crying on each other's shoulders. Now, most people would think that the reason why they're crying is purely because of it's very emotional. After all, Yosef asked Binyamin, tell me, before he revealed himself, tell me about your brother. You claim you had a brother. Yeah, I had a brother. I had 10 kids. Every single one of the kids I named after Yosef. And it was very emotional. Yosef even had to go to the other room to start crying. So people would say that the reason why Yosef is crying is because of the emotions. 22 long years, you haven't seen your brother, the only real brother, the brother from the same mother and father. And now it's emotional, so you're crying. Yet the Midrash says, no, that's not what's going on. Rashi quotes the Midrash, and listen to this, and you'll see how everything ties in together. Rashi says that Vayipol atzavar Binyamin, he cried. Why? Why did he cry? Not why the reason like we would be crying. Ashnei miktashot sha'atidin liot bechelko sheBinyamin. He was crying. Yosef was crying because of the 2 Beit Hamikdash that would be built in Binyamin's property and his land, and it's going to be destroyed. Yosef, at the time, he's hugging his brother. He's not thinking emotions of personal emotions. Wow, the 2 Beit Hamikdash are going to be built in his inheritance, in his property, and it's something to cry about. And why was Binyamin crying Yosef? Now, again, personal. Binyamin crying Yosef's shoulders. Why? Rashi says, because of Mishkan Shiloh. The Mishkan was built in Yosef's property. And hence he's crying. So each one is crying because of the other. The other one's lost. And the Ketav Sofer Zatzal points out. And he asks, why were the 2 Beit Hamikdashot and the Mishkan built in the land of Yosef and Binyamin? Why not Reuven, Shimon, Yehuda, Levi, Yisachar, Dan, Zevulun, Naphtali? Why Yosef and Binyamin? Of all the 12 Shvatim, why them? Ketav Sofer says something incredible. He says that the only 2 brothers who did not have hatred in their hearts were Yosef and Binyamin. Every single one of the other brothers had a component of sin, of hatred in their hearts. Of lotisna tachicha bilvavecha. Because of this, Hashem says, future Beit HaMikdash, it can't be built on your territory, Because when there's hate, the Beit HaMikdash, Mishkan cannot exist. They're only going to be built in Yosef's property, Yosef's inheritance, and Binyamin. And this is the reason Ketav Sofer says that this is why they were Zoche. And in fact, he writes that the Psukim are also very clearly indicative that since they were crying on each other's shoulders, not because of their own loss, Chazal are very clear. You're crying for your brother's loss. You're crying because of someone else. You care so much about someone else. That's the reason why you're deserving to have the Beit HaMikdash. But when there's hate, when there's sinah, Beit HaMikdash cannot exist. So Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Dan, all of them, they don't have the zechut because there's hate in there. There's hate in the heart. Again, on some small level, these are great Torah giants, but on some small level. Now I ask you to make a full circle. Where did this come from? Yosef and Binyamin. Where did they get this trait of having such selflessness and such love for the sake of another Jew, of another person? Well, they had their mother. Their mother, Rachel, was a tremendous source of inspiration as an example in life. The fact that the Rachel had such a selflessness and she gave up of the simanim, of the signs for her own sister, she gave up on everything for her own sister. Says the Ketav Sofer that this is the reason why the children of Rachel Imenu were the same prototype and they had the same selflessness and the same love. And the Ketav Sofer says that the only way that the Beit HaMikdash could be rebuilt and the only way we could have Mashiach and put an end to the suffering, put an end to this whole galut, to the end to the tragedies and look what's going on in the world, is only if you cry because of someone else. And you cry in someone else's shoulders, not because of your own pain, because of someone else's pain. When you have a midah, a trait of rachamim, mercy and love for the sake of another Jew. This is not an easy thing to do. This is very difficult in life, to feel more for another person than yourself. And you know, all the time I preach, I just gave a parenting lecture this past week, Tuesday night, and I was speaking to a number of couples there about raising their kids, and I asked them, I said parenting is a main part of parenting is really tikkun hamidot. Tikkun hamidot means self-perfection. Tikkun hamidot means that you're going to be tested non-stop. Marriage and children will test you on all cylinders. Until you're married, you are not tested. You are not. No, nothing compares to that test. Once you get married and you have a different personality than you, and you have kids that are pressing all the buttons, and the kids driving you crazy, not going to sleep at night, and the kids doing things to just tick you off. I said it takes a lot of tikkun hamidot, of self-perfection, to work on yourself nonstop. The parents who raise healthy children are the ones who have tikkun hamidot. They force themselves to work on themselves. The people who have good shalom bayit are the ones who work on it non-stop. I'm Blan Hara, 20 years into the marriage now. And I can't tell you, it's non-stop work still. You have to adjust, and you have to work on yourself, and you have to work on your midot, and you have to learn, what the other person wants and their needs and their desire, and to be selfless. Marriages can't last with selfish people. Selfishness is the acid to all marriages. And I think that the entire reason, besides the fact that Hashem wants the world to continue, Hashem wanted marriage and kids for one reason, because the goal of life is for a person to take themselves and become as outer-centered, as selfless as possible, and not an easy thing. So therefore, you have a lot of people that are very self-centered, and they struggle in their marriages, and they have a very difficult time, because when it's my desire, my will, I need something, I want something, versus your will, it's very hard to overlook my will for your will. It's a big, big struggle and a big clash. I want to watch my game. Now it's the playoffs and leave me alone. The wife needs your help. So what's going to be? What's more important? And you won't hear the end of it if you make that mistake to watch that sports game, right? And she'll bring it up, because if after all she's not number one and your priority in your life, then you're going to be in trouble. So you're constantly tested on all cylinders. Rabbatai, we learn from Rachel, we learn from Yosef and Binyamin, that this is the story of life. The only way you could have Hashem's presence, the only way you could have the Shekhinah, is if you have Shalom and if you care about someone else. Interestingly enough, it says that Shalom Bayit is very much compared to the building of the Mishkan, the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And it says, Ish v'isha shezachush Shechina shura b'neihem. The Shekhinah is what upholds the Beit HaMikdash. The Shekhinah is what upholds the house. Ish and Isha, you remove the Yud and the Hey, you remove Hashem, you have fire. The Shekhinah is what upholds. How do you have the Shekhinah? There's one recipe. Shalom is the only way to have Hashem's Shekhinah. So what happens a lot of times in marriages, and what happens with kids a lot of times, the Yetzer Hara, wherever it sees that it's gold, that is something important, it puts all its kochot into that area to create resistance. You wonder why so many Shalom people have struggled with Shalom Bayit. So many people struggle with their kids. Why? Whenever there's gold, whenever it's something valuable, Yetzer Hara puts all his emphasis to try to create blockages and bring things to cause a lack of Shalom, because lack of Shalom causes the Shekhinah to disappear. Take this a step further. Interestingly, on a side note I'll mention, I saw that there's a midrash, the Psikta de Rav Kahana, writes a fascinating thing. Psikta Rav Kahana writes that, and I quote, Rav Pinchas v'shem Rav Shmuel bar Nachman Mesorat Agadahi, we have a tradition passed down to us. She'in zaro shel Esav nofela biad banel shel Rachel, that the descendants of Esav are only going to fall in the hands of the children of Rachel Imenu. Rabbi, what's the significance of this? That the descendants of Esav, this is Rome, this is Edom, this is America, the last Galut, this is the last stop, the exile, Galut Edom, which we're in now, which has lasted 1,957 years, is the Galut of Edom, which is from Esav. It says it's only going to fall into the hands of the children of Rachel. What's the significance? Why not the children of Yaakov? Why not children of Avram? Children of Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, many other people. What's the significance of Rachel? The Balaturm says, you know what the gematria of Esav is? And normally, Rabbatai, we're not into gematrias, but a Balaturm is a Rishon. They could say gematria. The Balaturm says Esav, the gematria of Esav is what? Ayin, 70. Sin, 300. Vav, 6. It says 376. Esav is gematria 376. The gematria of Shalom, says the Balaturim. What's Shalom? Shin is 300. Lamed is 30, 330. Vav is 6, 336. And Mem is 40, that's 376. The gematria of Esav is the same gematria as Shalom. And says the Balaturim, and the Ketal Sofer points this out, that the message over here in this Midrash is that you want to know when Esav is going to fall into the hands of Rachel. Rachel represents selflessness, shalom, peace, camaraderie, a unity. When is Esav going to fall? This exile going to end? This exile, this Galut Edom is going to end whenever we act like Rachel. Whenever we're like the children of Rachel Imenu, which is an incredible thought about caring about someone else and putting your life's focus on someone else. Now, a lot of people don't know that there are a lot of correlations between Pesach and Tisha B'Av. You notice that? Did you notice that in the keynote that we read last night? We have a whole tune where we read that we compare and contrast Betzeti Mitzrayim and compare to Betzeti Yerushalayim. That when it was Betzeti Mitzrayim, freedom, we had prestige, we had power, we were in good shape. That's contrasted to Betzeti Yerushalayim, a downtrodden nation who was kicked out of the Yerushalayim, Eretz Yisrael, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. I want to ask you, why is the Keynote comparing always Pesach and Tisha B'Av? Pesach, Tisha B'Av. Why Pesach? You picked a joyous holiday? So pick Sukkot, Zaman Simchatenu, right? Maybe make a comparison when we went out, the Sukkot compared to Tisha B'Av. What's the significance of Pesach and Tisha B'Av? And listen to this, an incredible thought. Rabbi Solomon quotes the Ben Ish Chai, and the Ben Ish Chai writes that we know that the entire exile, 210 years in Mitzrayim, was all because of this sinah, because of this hatred. And in the Haggadah, when we read about it, the entire Haggadah is all about how we left the Galut. And we mentioned B'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Ben Ish Chai wants to know that if the entire Pesach Seder is all about redemption from Galut, the Galut of Mitzrayim, shouldn't the Baal Haggadah, the person who wrote the Haggadah, besides mentioning B'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, give some type of clue or something incorporated in the Haggadah to teach us how to fix the issue, fix the problems, in order to be redeemed from this Galut? And listen to what the Ben Ish Chai says. Ben Ish Chai says, in fact, the Baal Haggadah does. In the fun part of the night, where we sing Manish Tana, says the Ben Ish Chai, the Manish Tana has a part where we ask, what's the difference between Manish Tana, Halayla Hazeh, that on all other nights, we don't dip anything. No one's dipping anything in their food. They just take the food and eat it. But here, we dip twice. Says the Ben Ish Chai, what's the significance, and listen carefully to this, the significance of the two dippings. Ben Ish Chai writes that the first dipping in the Haggadah represents the two dippings represent two dippings in history. The first dipping, which we take the karpas and we dip it in the salt water, says the Ben Ish Chai, this karpas, the last letters pas, says the Ben Ish Chai, represents when the brothers took the ketonat pasim, Yosef's tunic, that we talked about 10 minutes ago. They took this ketonat pasim, they dipped it into blood, and they showed Yaakov Avinu, and they told him, please recognize, is this not the tunic of your son? He must have been devoured by animals. Yosef was killed. They brought depression to Yaakov Avinu. Says the Ben Ish Chai, the first dipping that we take the karpas and dip it in salt water represents that, the ketonot pasim. Ben Ish Chai goes on to say, however, there's a second dipping. The second dipping occurs when we take the maror, we take the romaine lettuce and dip it into the charoset. The charoset, which we all love so much and it tastes so good. Ben Ish Chai says, what's this dipping, the second dipping of the maror into charoset? He says, well, there was a second time that there was a dipping in the story of Mitzrayim. If you remember, that the dipping of the tunic, the ketonot pasim and blood, led to us going into exile. What got us out? What was the turning point where Paro buckled under pressure and he let the Jews out? He says, well, if you remember, there's a mitzvah that Hashem commanded before the 10th plague. He said that you should ulkachtem agudat ezov, you should take a bundle of hyssop and you should dip it, tvatem badam, dip it in blood and put it on your mashkof, put it on your doorposts. And when the angel of death rips through Mitzrayim and it kills all the firstborn, you're going to be saved. Says the Ben Ish Chai, you know what this signifies? This is how you get out of Galut, and this was the beginning of leaving exile. Ukachtem agudat ezov. Says the Ben Ish Chai that the Baal Haggadah is alluding to, how do you redeem yourself from exile? How do you get out of America? How do you get out of Europe and all the other countries? You want to go back to Eretz Yisrael. And with the coming of Mashiach, how do you do that? Agudat ezov, it says aguda. The Baal Haggadah is telling you that when the Jewish people are one unit, aguda means connected together, that they're one, there's camaraderie, there's a certain, we don't hate each other, we don't badmouth each other, we don't put each other down. If you have that, says the Ben Ish Chai, that is when Galut comes to an end. And interestingly enough, Rav Matishel Salman writes that if you take a look throughout history, we find that I know it was like this in Iran, and I know it was like this in a lot of other countries also. Whenever it became time before Pesach, the Goyim would start rioting and attacking the Jews and coming up with crazy claims. These are what were called the blood libels. Rabbi, people here are familiar with the blood libels? No? The blood libels are where the Goyim claim that the Jews took the non-Jewish kids, they shechted them, and they took their blood and put it into their matzah. And Rabbi Chana Wasserman, Rabbi Tisha Salman quotes this. He says, what's the reason you normally sheker, lies don't last. Sheker ein lo raglayim. Lies, fallacies don't last. They dissipate after a number of years. How come this one lasted? How come this lie has lasted throughout all the generations and all the countries, wherever you are, about this lie? And says Rabbi Chanan Wasserman that this is a punishment for the brothers that dipped the ketonot pasim in the blood. He says as a punishment, we're still paying the price for this. And hence all the accusations from the Goyim that you're taking little non-Jewish children and killing them, it's all because of that. And Chazal say wherever the Jewish people, we continue in the footsteps of our ancestors and we don't fix the problem, all these accusations and all these problems are going to come back. And hence the blood libels have existed for so many years. You want to know another interesting fact? On the night of Pesach, the Haggadah, I don't know if you have this minhag, a lot of people, they eat an egg after the first half of the Seder, and right before the meal is served, people eat a hard-boiled egg. And where does that come from? Some people want to say it's a Zecher Korban Chagiga. They used to have a Korban Chagiga, represents that. The Ramah doesn't say that. Rabbi, listen to Halacha of Pesach. Fascinating. The night of Pesach, which always falls out, interestingly, that the night of Tisha B'Av. The Halacha writes clearly that whatever night Pesach falls out on, Tisha B'Av falls out on. Another correlation between the two Chagim. I even took a look at my calendar. I said, was it really this past Pesach? I don't remember. Already 4 or 5 months ago. Was Pesach really Motzei Shabbat? I looked at the calendar. It was Motzei Shabbat, if you remember. Whatever night Pesach falls out on, that's the night when Tisha B'Av happens. And the Ramah writes, Ramah says as follows, that on the night of Pesach, the minhag is Le'echol besuda beitzim, to eat hard-boiled eggs, Zecher la'avelut, as a remembrance for the fact that we're mourning. You ask yourself, what in the world does night of Pesach, which is Zaman Charatenu, time of joy, time of freedom, you're eating an egg because of Avelut, because of mourning? Why are we mourning exactly the night of Pesach? Valid question. So the Ramah goes on to say, he says, nearly the reason is because the night of Tisha B'Av falls out on Pesach. That Tisha B'Av always coincides with Pesach. And this concept of the correlation between the two is that whatever Pesach is and the significance of Pesach, the reason why we went into Galut is all because of the Sinat Chinam, starting with the brothers. And the reason why we left is because of Agudat Ezov, because the Jews were united. Unfortunately, we're always only united when we have oppression, when we have the enemies attacking us, when we have the enemies killing us. The Jews in Mitzrayim had a commonality between them all. The fact that they're all being beaten and killed. It created a certain unity among them. And hence the Agudah, for this reason, they were zocha to leave Mitzrayim. Wherever there's unity, wherever there's peace, Hashem's Shechina exists, everything is fine. There's bracha, everything goes well. Wherever there's fighting, wherever the people are not getting along, it causes problems. And we say this in even the Misha Berach every Shabbat. I don't know if you pay attention to the rabbi saying the Misha Berach. Every single Shabbat we say this Misha Berach as a tefillah. Misha Berach we begin right after Torah reading. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Hu yivarach kol hakal hakadosh hazeh. We bless everyone in the congregation. And we say, Hu Yevarach Yadchon, Vizakei Yadchon, Hashem should bless you, and Vishma Kotzol Yadchon, He should listen to your tefillot, and He should save you from tzara, from anguish and bitterness in life. Now look what the Mishnah Baruch says. V'ita benenu benechem ava v'achva shalom v're'ut, that Hashem should implant among you peace, camaraderie, getting along, loving each other, not putting each other down, not bad-mouthing each other, not speaking lashon hara, not destroying shidduchim through lashon hara, all this stuff that ruins this nation. What happens, Rabbatai, what happens when you get rid of this hate? Silak sinat chinam b'menechem. Hashem removes sinat chinam, the discussion of the day. Only then we say, V'yishbor ol hagoyim al tzavarechem, Hashem will break the yoke of the goyim from upon your necks. Rabbatai, even the Mishnah Baruch is clear that the yoke of the goyim can only be removed if there is shalom among the Jewish people. And it just seems that it's such a hard thing to do. And it just seems that so many people, like I talked about last night, have so many people on their hate list. People that they just don't like. And it's so easy to fall into this trap of hating someone. You know, I had an incident a number of years ago where, not over here, it had to do in New York, where in the East Coast, a guy came over to me and he was very upset. And I asked him, what's going on? Were you upset? It was right after Purim. It's right before Pesach, this Chag of Cheretenu, Chag of, according to now, with my understanding, a Chag of love and camaraderie. And he said, you know, a certain candy store he was very upset at. And he said, this candy store, I can't stand this place. You know, I said, what happened? He says, well, right before Purim, I called the candy store and I put in an order to be delivered to a certain house, my family member. And I said exactly the address clearly. And you know, they didn't deliver. So I said, did you call the candy place? Yeah. The candy place claimed that you didn't say that address. You didn't say 1762. You said 1662, whatever the address was. Right? And they delivered to the wrong address. So the candy store wanted their money, the $40 for the platter, $40, $50 for the platter, and he refused to give the money. So I told the guy, I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. It's just $40, $50. If you want, I'll lay out the money. For the sake of shalom, I'll give you the money. You pay. No, Rabbi, it has nothing to do with that. No, it's a matter of principle. It has nothing to do. It has a matter of principle. And up to this day, years later, the guy hasn't talked to this candy store. Any opportunity he has, he bad-mouths the candy store, that the candies are horrible, everything they have is horrible, the service is horrible, they stole my money, didn't even pay it. They were going to steal my money. Find everything in the books to put down a store and the store owner, who you daven in the same shul, that I won't talk to him because of one tiny incident like this, which was a mistake. You know, it could have been on his side, it could have been the candy store owner's side. As I mentioned last night, you see how quick we are? A person who just shushed me. It took 10 years ago, it took me a good 2 weeks, shushed me, just to shush. Because during davening, it was even before the Musaf, as I said last night, someone shushed me. And I was like, chutzpah, who does he think he is? And he's telling the rabbi, he's shushing me. We are so quick to hate people for the slightest disrespect as we perceive, slightest hurt to our dignity, and who we are. Rabbatai, I said this to a shiur of men this morning. I truly believe that it's impossible for a person to have good relationships with other people and have shalom unless they have a good, healthy sense of self-esteem. That's why I'm such a big fan of Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky Zatzal. I view him as a gadol. All his books that he wrote on this topic, because if a person doesn't have a good sense of self-esteem, they have a frail sense of self-esteem. The slightest little comment could set you off, and you make such a big deal about it. A person with a good sense of self-esteem will be able to handle it. Well, hear it, okay, they were upset, they were emotionally worked up, they said something they really didn't mean. Someone with low self-esteem, marriages become very difficult with low self-esteem if one of the couples have low self-esteem, because any criticism, any words that resemble the slightest sense of attack, of criticism, is the biggest deal, because they don't have enough self-worth to be able to handle it. It chips away at them and they go ballistic, they go crazy. Imagine such a person trying to have peace with people in the community. Any slightest error. I've met people with low self-esteem where a person, I didn't greet them properly. I'm usually pretty good smiling at people, greeting them properly. One guy I know in the community, and he always has bad feelings towards me because I one time I didn't greet him properly. One time he felt like it was like a slight to his honor. People with low self-esteem, you can't go right. You're walking on eggshells because any little thing you do wrong, it's like the biggest deal in the world. Now, it's something to think about, something to work on. Just to finish off over here, one of the last 2 points. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz writes very powerful words. And I'm telling you this based on last night's speech and not tonight. The goal of Tisha B'Av is not just to get inspired and let it just fly away. I want people, like last night, a few people came over and said, Rabbi, you got me thinking. There are people that I haven't talked to in a long time, number of years. Maybe I should do something about it. Because I truly believe, and I really mean this, more than your tefillot, as the Gemara said last night, we quoted, more than chesed, more than tzedakah, more than you sending the IDF protective gear for their battles, is a person making peace with someone they haven't talked to in a long time. Find a person that you're not in good terms, or you just, something happened, you're not in talking terms, that will do more for the sake of the soldiers and saving the soldiers in the army. It will do more in building the Beit HaMikdash than anything else you could do. This is my promise based on the Gemara. The Gemara is very clear about it. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz writes that if you take a look at history, anytime there was achdut, there was bracha. When the Jews came out of Mitzrayim, how did we receive the Torah? When were we worthy? The Midrash is clear. They went from mountain to mountain. No, not of the mountains. You're not deserving to have the Torah. It says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Hahar. They reached Har Sinai. It says the Midrash that was the only mountain that there was no arguments and fights. Now, I don't know that I can imagine the arguments and fights back then. People had to encamp. They traveled and they had to set up their camps. By every single mountain, every single location, and every single of the 42 travelings, which you read about in Parshat Masai, the Chazal said there was always arguments and fights. Right? Always. No, that's my place. I want to set up my tent there. That's my thing. What are you doing? You know, they were always arguing. There's only one place that there was no argument, and that was by Har Sinai. Hashem says, no fights here. Now you're deserving to receive the Torah. That the Torah would not have been given to the Jewish people, but there's no shalom. And he goes on to say that he saw with his own eyes, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says, that many yeshivot in Europe, that they were able to withstand the most trying of times and the harshest conditions. They survived. They survived poverty. They survived the goyim attacking. They survived everything. However, he says that the yeshivot that had machloket, the yeshivot that had arguments and disagreements and they were not together, those yeshivot closed down. But I'm not sure if I should say this publicly, but right now everyone's made up already. I'm going to just highlight and bring out, I hope I don't regret this, saying this, how with my own eyes I said this is so true. You know, now everyone is in good terms, but whenever there's machloket, the damage is done. You know, I was part of a high school a number of years ago, and I wasn't one of the partners, there was a disagreement. And each side, again, these are rabbis, everyone's justified, they had their thing. Bottom line, it was an argument broke, and there was a machloket a little bit. But the school just closed down. And I purely attribute this, again, the rabbis are in good terms now, everyone's made up, we got past it, it's not one of those petty fights that you keep forever. It was a big deal. The yeshiva closed down. The yeshiva went through a lot of, when I first moved here 10 years ago, a lot of difficulties. The yeshiva endured financially and buildings and other stuff. It endured everything. What was the Makkah Patish what destroyed the yeshiva? It was the machloket. The people in their lives, you take a look at the family members that are not in talking terms, the family members that are not getting along, that's where there's destruction, there's ruination, there's everything goes downhill. Hashem's Shekhinah is completely left. However, in the houses and the places where people are getting along, the family members are getting along, that's where there's bracha and happiness. And how many stories do we hear over and over again about people that were mevater, they said, okay, overlook, let it go, let go of the injustices, let go of everything for the sake of peace. And they themselves, there was so much bracha that came to their lives. I'll finish off with one last story which I alluded to last night. The people putting on tefillin, we still have a good 10-15 minutes. If we could just wait until, yes, out of matter of respect, just 10 minutes if we could wait. But there's plenty of time. People get distracted very easily. Okay, the lecture is more important than putting on tefillin. I mentioned last night about three brothers at their shiva, where I went to the shiva house, and only one of the brothers were there. That the other brothers weren't there, and I'm going to tell you the story of what happened. These three brothers, and no one will have any clue what I'm talking about. Their father passed away, and the father was worth about $500 million. He left inheritance to be split up among the three brothers. The two oldest brothers, they felt that since they spent the most amount of time with their father, they're deserving to get $175 million each. The younger brother did not take a liking to this. Meaning, if they split up 175, he's only left with 150 million. Poor guy, only 150 million. This created a whole machloket in the family. Huge arguments, huge fight. To the point that they had to hire lawyers. True story. This went on for months and months and months. Each side had to pay, over the course of a few years, they had to pay $4 to $5 million in lawyer fees. And there I am sitting at the Shiva house with this brother, the youngest brother. The youngest brother says, Rabbi, it's been 30 years now. 30 years. Yes? And they're not having in talking terms. To continue past the Shiva for 30 years. The family broken up. He said, I think I made a mistake. You think? The kids didn't have any cousins. The family was broken apart. The family simchas, they were not together. All because of what? Because of fight over. I'm not saying it's not no reason. It's a sinat chinam, a hatred for no reason. Money is a reason, right? People justify. $25 million is a lot of money. But if a person could just let it go, if a person could not make a big deal, you have so much bracha that comes to your life. So you see from all these midrashim that we quoted, reason why Klal Yisrael ended up in Galut, the first Galut, is because of the brothers. The fact that they had hatred. They dipped his ketonot basim in the blood. The fact that we got out of the Galut, they got good at Ezov because Klal Yisrael were united. Whenever throughout history you take a look at with Jewish people, were felt destruction, ruination, and death, is all because they were not together. There was no camaraderie. The times where things were peaceful are the times of Achav. Achav was idol worshippers, we quoted last night. Then that time, they were beautiful. They went to war, they were victorious. Hashem should help us to think about this. And think about the people we have on our list. Finish off from last night. The people you have on our list that are, let me just, they don't listen, I tried. People are not listening. Rabbi is just, okay, whatever. The people that have people on their list that they don't like, and everybody has it. As a rabbi, I also had people on my list over the years, certain people that just, whatever reason, they didn't strike me the right way, and I just didn't have good feelings towards them. I don't know, what's the big deal? Rabbi, you know how many questions I got last night after that speech? Rabbi, what if I just I'm not fighting with them, I just don't want to talk to them. I said, what is that? That's sinat chinam. Let it go. Put the past behind. We want to get out of this galut. I don't know about you. I want to get out of here. As beautiful as LA is and as beautiful the weather is here, I want to get out of here. I want an end to the anti-Semitism. I want to live in a world where I could actually see God and feel spiritually connected. I want to live in a world where my kids could play in the streets and won't have to worry about them, and everyone gets along, and it's a beautiful world, a world of shalom and peace. And we're all dying for that. And I'm telling you that the Gemara says it's only one thing. One thing is, find the people on your list that you don't like and have the courage and have the self-esteem to be able to make that phone call. Every single one of these times you make peace with people you haven't talked to. A guy came over to me last night. He says, Rabbi, you got me thinking. Someone who hasn't talked to a family member, close family member, 15 years. I might be the bigger man and make the phone call to try to just, you don't have to be best friends with everyone. I have to point out. It doesn't mean you have to hang out with them, someone you just don't get along with, the personalities. You don't have to be best friends. Just don't hate the guy. Just be able to say hi to him and say Shabbat Shalom to him. And put aside all the other petty matters for the sake of the Jewish people. So that finally we should be zocheh to have Mashiach finally coming. Amen.